All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Carolyn Pack with the Alexandria Burke Branch Library. We are thrilled to be hosting Night at the Antique Store for Mystery Authors Tell All event tonight, starting with Tracy Gardner. She's the author of the Avery Ayers Antique Mystery series, which began with Mary Higgins Clark Edgar Award nominated Ruby Red Herring. Connie Berry is the author of the Kate Hamilton Mystery Series, set in the UK and featuring an American antiques dealer with a gift for solving crimes. Trish Esden is the author of the Scandal Mountain Antique Mystery Series, which explores the secretive and adrenaline-charged underbelly of Vermont's antique and art world. And last but not least, Lane Stone is the author of the Pet Palace and Tiara Investigation Mystery Series. As Cordy Abbott, she's writing the Old Town Antiques Mysteries, which began with Dead Men Don't Decorate. Before we begin, everyone is muted, so if you have any questions or comments for our speakers, please feel free to post them in the chat or the Q&A, and they will try to get to them after their discussion. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to you all to start the discussion.
Thanks, Carolyn, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We are calling this, as Carolyn said, welcome the Night at the Antique Store. The antiques business is at the heart of all of our books, but we realized early on that each of our books has a slightly different tone. And tone typically refers to the mood or the attitude of the book. And the author accomplishes that by something as both as simple and as difficult as word choice. The tone might be optimistic or pessimistic or humorous or dark, though none of our books are dark. And so you'll see that as we talk about our books. Connie, do you want to talk a little bit about your last book, The Shadow of Memory?
Yeah, I would love to. And first of all, thank you so much to Carolyn and to the Burke Library. And to everyone who is here tonight, it is a great pleasure to be with you. The book that I'm talking about tonight is called The Shadow of Memory. It is the fourth in the Kate Hamilton Mystery Series, featuring Kate Hamilton, who is an American antiques dealer. She is back in the Suffolk village of Long Barston, contemplating her future, if she has one, with Detective Inspector Tom Mallory. She and her colleague, Ivor Tweedy, have been asked to appraise a fine collection of antiques at Netherfield Sanatorium, which is a former Victorian insane asylum on the Suffolk coast. And among the treasures is an oil painting attributed to the Dutch master Jan van Eyck from the 15th century. When a retired criminal inspector is found dead, Kate learns that the halls of the sanatorium housed more than priceless art. She is also surprised to learn that Will Parker, the dead man, was her very good friend Vivian's very first boyfriend. They met in 1963 when they were young teenagers at a seaside holiday camp near the sanatorium. She hasn't seen him in 60 years. When they and three other young teens explored an abandoned house where something pretty terrible happened. So here, 60 years later, he is killed. Then when a second member of that childhood gang is killed, and then a third, Kate realizes that her friend Vivian is next on the list.
It's interesting. I've read it. It's very interesting. Trish, can you tell us about the art of the decoy?
Sure. It's interesting when you talk about tone too. I think the covers say quite a bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Art of the Decoy is the first novel in the Scandal Mountain Antiques Mystery series. It takes place in northern Vermont. My main character, Edie Brown, is a folk art expert, and she's returned home after her mother has been charged. Actually, she's been sent to prison for art forgery. Edie's family business, which her grandparents had started many decades earlier, is floundering, and she intends to try to save the business and also prove herself to her mother by taking over the business while her mother is away. And soon after she arrives in the village of Scandal Mountain, she gets the opportunity to appraise a decoy collection. It's actually a very special waterfowl collection, which was created by Quebec family of carvers. And it's in a hoarder's farmhouse. So it's quite an interesting backwoods, right on the border between Quebec and Vermont. In fact, she can see the border from where she is. And she's very excited about this because this could really bring her business back to its former glory if she can do what she hopes to do. Unfortunately, not long after she starts appraising this collection, the collection vanishes, and she is the person who is very suspect of the robbery. And there's other little kind of hitch to this, is there is a romance in my novel, and her ex-boyfriend or lover, because he really wasn't a boyfriend, also who happens to be her ex-probation officer, is in town. So there's good reason that she's a suspect. And I'm not going to say more because as we go on, you'll find out more about this.
And because it's on my TBR
oh, good.
pile too. Tracy,
Credit. Great.
the book I'm reading now, I only have time to read like a few pages before I go to sleep. And as you know, the book I'm reading now is Peril at Pennington Manor, yours. And I'm enjoying it so much. I mean, it's like I look forward to reading those few pages at night before I go to sleep. Can you share a little bit more
Sure.
with guests about that?
Yep. And yeah, thank you. And I just finished reading yours, which just came out last week, Cordy, and I loved it. It's a lot of fun. Very good. So Peril at Pennington Manor is the second in the series that started with, this is Ruby Red Herring that started the series. And the series follows Avery Ayers, who is late 20s and has just come home back to Manhattan to take over her parents' antique appraisal business because they have unfortunately been killed in a tragic car accident a year before we meet Avery at the beginning of the story. So she's got big shoes to fill. Both of her parents are gone, and she has a teenage sister also to care for with some help from her eccentric Aunt Midge, who factors into both books. So in the course of the first assignment that Avery is involved in, she's in the process of appraising a ruby, a rare ruby that is part of a dragon medallion, and the dragon has been missing one of its ruby eyes for centuries. So Avery comes into contact with the ruby as part of a collector who is able to bring it in through an acquisitions liaison through a museum in New York. She discovers in the first chapter that there's a possibility that the ruby is linked to her parents' mysterious death, which she never had an explanation for. So that kind of sets her on the course of trying to figure out what really happened to her parents. And throughout that process, then we learn more about Avery. She does end up getting some help from a detective that she meets who is masquerading as somebody else. So there's some intrigue there. And the second book in the series, Peril at Pennington Manor, is, if you think sort of a grown-up Nancy Drew theme. It takes place in a modern day castle in the Hudson Valley. And Avery and her team, her antiques appraisal team, are they're on an assignment working in the castle for a couple weeks at a time, appraising the entire collection of a duke who is going to be moving and liquidating his whole entire collection because they're selling the castle. So if you were a fan of Nancy Drew, you'd think about hidden passageways and secret staircases. And I had a lot of fun writing that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that book 1 has got such a big surprise in it. It's all I can do to keep my mouth shut about that. So I'm not going to say anything.
Thank
So
you.
let's talk about antiques, the antique trade. What makes this trade an interesting backdrop for a mystery? To me, it's antiques are appealing for two seemingly contradictory reasons. One is nostalgia is so appealing to us, but the other thing is the journey that piece, that decorative art or piece of furniture took from the maker to now has changed it. And I think that's fascinating too. That gives us a lot of material. Tracy, you want to talk about that? Why you chose antiques trade?
Yeah, and I think you said it really well. Antiques in general, they just each have their own story. They each have such a history and often have changed hands enough times that there is just so many interesting little pieces that will come out as you're like investigating the provenance of something and where a certain piece has come from and traveled and as it's changed hands, and sometimes even the lore that goes into that piece that it sort of comes with. And I think along with that is it's a great setup for mystery.
Yeah. So Connie, how did you choose an antiques dealer as your protagonist? Do you have experience in that field?
Yes, I do secondhand, actually. My parents were high-end antiques dealers operating around the northern Illinois, Chicago area. And they were actually collectors first. My father was the one who was really interested in the antiques trade. He loved Oriental antiques, Asian antiques. I shouldn't say Oriental, Asian antiques. And he kind of got my mother involved in it. She was a wonderful researcher. She would find those histories and she would put as much history as she could find with the antique. And so she always said, so that people aren't just buying an object, they're buying a piece of history. So she was kind of famous for that, actually. And so I worked in their shop when I was in high school. Every family vacation was a very thinly disguised buying trip. So we would stop at all the antique shops along the way, and our car would get piled up with boxes. And that was just the world that I grew up in. And also our house was like an extension of the antique shop. So objects would come and go, large, for a while we had a life-size marble bust of Marie Antoinette in our living room. And then she went away. I guess she must have gotten sold. And then we had the Three Graces and just all kinds of weird stuff, which I thought was totally normal. And then later I have found out that my friends all thought it was really creepy. But I just thought that was the way things were. And it was just my house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Trish, how about you? What is your connection to antiques?
My grandparents, actually one of my grandfathers specifically, was a collector of early furniture. And I sort of got the bug from him. Both my parents did. I went to auctions from time I was young, museums for art, and antiques were always part of my life. And by the time I was a teenager, I started dealing in antiques.
Wow.
And I have been an antique dealer pretty much all my life to different degrees. For about 20 years, I owned a Vermont country store that was built in the 1820s, and we ran an antique and florist shop there. We've sold that building, and my husband and I now still deal antiques full time. So it really, the idea of writing mysteries, it's sort of a what if for me. It's like my family's very creative and big imaginations. So, you go on a boring trip to buy to the flea market, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking, what if, this or that, what if this cheap piece of jewelry I was buying turned out to be some amazing piece? So it was sort of a natural combination of my love of writing and my experience as an antique dealer.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about our genre. A mystery set in the world of antiques can be written in a variety of subgenres. Cozy, traditional, historical, thriller, police procedural, paranormal. Ooh, that'd be fun. So how would you describe your own book, and how did you decide on that particular category? Dead Men Don't Decorate is a cozy. You can probably tell from the title and the cover. And I feel comfortable in that space. I don't like to read anything very scary. And so I like that kind of a world. Connie, let's start with you. How would you describe?
I just started reading your book, and it is very funny. So you were talking about tone earlier, but I think along with the genre sometimes comes a tone, and your books are really in that humorous, cozy genre. There's just a lot of funny things, a lot of funny comments. In my books, I would call my books traditional mysteries. They are usually a little longer than cozies. They're very much character driven. But I also love that puzzle plot, kind of a, Agatha Christie, the golden age of detective fiction. And there is humor in my books as well, but it is more that kind of a dry British humor, because all of my characters are British with the exception of Kate.
Yeah, that's interesting. Tracy, can you talk?
I would say mine, like yours, is a cozy mystery, kind of a whodunit. I like to keep the reader guessing as long as I possibly can. So, and it's I do have a few elements where there's a, kind of the high stakes danger sort of high intensity scenes, but definitely would fit into the category of cozy mystery.
Yeah. And your character's young and fun and hip, but has heavy responsibilities laid on her too. And I think that adds a lot to the book too. So Trish, how about you?
Mine are traditional novels. Where they differ a little is mine are not murder mysteries. My novels center on the art crimes, forgery, bid rigging, and property, various different crimes. There may be a dead body that floats through or is found, but it is not the center of the story whatsoever. My stories, actually, probably, I'm a fairly descriptive writer, so they have a slight Gothic tone, but they're very contemporary. And I'm trying to think if my brain kind of went quiet there for a minute. Because I was thinking of the humor. I can't say there isn't humor in my novels, but it comes more from an individual character. Might be a character who has a habit of saying comebacks or likes to lighten the mood during tension. There's a character called Edie Brown is my main character, and her Uncle Tuck is part of her crew. And Uncle Tuck, when things get tough, tends to make a joke or tends to laugh or chuckle, but that's his personality rather than the book itself being light.
Yeah, there's a difference. Tracy, you also write art thrillers, right? Do these two worlds overlap?
I wrote a series of 3 art-themed cozy mysteries for Hallmark, and they're definitely, writing those absolutely helped in preparing me to write the Antiques Appraisal series. There's overlap in the sense that the art-themed stories and then the Antiques Appraisal, you're dealing in the same world. With the same theme, kind of dealing with the same sort of businesses. My main character was looking into researching very similar things, to unravel the mystery for both.
So I mean, obviously there are antiques in museums, you know, I mean, the Met has, you know, rooms and rooms of historical furniture, and also the high price point of both fine arts and antiques.
Oh, yeah.
Both make it appealing to bad characters. Anyone else want to weigh in on that, about your genre and how it might? Okay, let's go on to the setting. The Old Town Antiques Mysteries are set in Marthasville, which is a very thinly veiled version of Alexandria, Virginia. And it's so much fun to write about because I love Alexandria, first of all, and we've lived there a long time, over 2 decades, and but also its proximity to Washington, D.C. means it is the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, I would never run out of plots as long as Washington, D.C. is what it is. So, Connie, you write about an American antiques dealer, but the setting is in the UK. How did you choose that? I think I know.
Yeah, well, a couple of reasons. One is you write what you love. I am an unashamed dyed-in-the-wool Anglophile. My father's parents came over from Scotland as adults, and they settled in Buffalo, New York area, but they did not become really, I mean, they did become citizens of the United States, but in their hearts, they were always still Scottish, and they lived in a little Scottish enclave. And so when I would go visit them, it was really like going to Scotland, because I would listen to them talk. They never lost their accent, the foods that they ate, the things that they did, the people that they hung out with. They were lawn bowling professionals. My grandfather was a landscape gardener. He was, so I just grew up in that atmosphere where everything British is best.
Yeah.
And then when I was in college, I went to school at St. Clair's in Oxford, and that's where I really fell under the spell of the British Isles. I studied British literature and history in college, and that's just where I want to spend time. And when that's what I read. I read mostly books set in the UK. That's just what I love. And when you're writing a book, you spend a lot of time in that setting. Yeah. And so, you know, Cordy, as you love Alexandria, and Trish, you love Vermont, and Tracy, you know, I'm sure you have settings that you just love to spend time in, especially during COVID. It was just so comforting to be able to escape from the real world and go to England in my imagination.
Yeah. Trish, Northern Vermont, what is unique about that, and what do you like bringing to readers?
Well, I've lived in Vermont, one part of it or another, since my early teens, and I really wanted to write to show Vermont's diversity because it's more culturally diverse and changing. Vermont is changing than a lot of people assume.
Yeah.
The Art of the Decoy, I chose it purposefully because the French-Canadian culture is very important in this novel. Northern Vermont, along the border, has a lot of people with Quebec roots. They go back and forth across the border till COVID on a regular basis. So I wanted to show that. My second novel actually goes down to some degree to Manchester, Vermont, which is a wealthy tourist area. So you can delve into different communities within a state and show people more of Vermont than they might have seen before. It really is a very, it's historically very early. You go out to Isle of Man, it goes back to the 1600s in Quebec. So there's a long history. The antiques here have a long history. And that's really why I chose Vermont.
So Vermont is more than aging hippies and Ben and Jerry's ice cream, right?
Well, and the whole hippie story is more interesting than you might think, because the farmers were here when they came and were quite accepting of the hippies.
Yeah, good.
But, you know, it's an interesting place.
Tracy, now your characters split their time between New York City and rural upstate New York, and the manor that the second book is it has it's almost a character in its own, that's in the upstate New York, right? So how does all that impact your story?
Yeah, I wanted the best of both worlds. I wanted the really cozy, kind of inviting, relatable feel of a small town. So I came up with my fictional town of Lilac Grove, which is an hour outside of Manhattan. But I also, and I think now, like, you know, I learn a lot of things about myself and my own writing after the fact, after I've written a book and it's done. And I think now, looking back, the reason part of the reason I wrote it the way I did is because I love both. I love that cozy feel, that small town community. And that's where I live now, but I am from Detroit and I love Manhattan. I absolutely, I would go a couple times a year, every year. I love it. I just soak up the energy there. So I think to put that into story form, it gives a really unique opportunity to the characters and to my main character to have the best of both worlds and to kind of come home at the end of a day and have that nice small town feel, everybody, you know, where everybody knows you, and which also lends itself to great mystery. But then, you know, if I want to write a high stakes car chase scene, that's going to go really well in the middle of Manhattan, because it's even scarier. So, and then with Peril at Pennington Manor, set at the Manor House, it's in the Hudson Valley. So it's just for Avery and her team and myself, it's kind of an escape, which I think is what writing is and reading is in general anyway. Yeah.
So setting, of course, is not just the place, it's also time. And antiques are objects of the past. So do you bring history into your plots? Let me see. Trish, you want to take that one first?
Well, yeah, definitely. As I said, it's the French-Canadian culture. The decoys were generations dating back to the 1900s. Yeah, there's no question that history is a big part of it. It's sort of hard to have outbringing in the history, because that's what they are. They're a reflection of what people choose to keep, what people choose to give away, and that's history. It's history of culture and the life of people.
Yeah, interesting. Connie?
History plays a huge role in all my books, and that's really because I love history. If I, you know, could go back in time, as long as I could come back and take a shower every once in a while, I could definitely live in the past. But in this latest book, the Shadow of Memory, we've got history going back to the 15th century with the Netherlandish painters, and that is important. And then we have the history of private, what they called at that time, lunatic asylums in the UK. And the one that I write about was developed along the lines of a French theory. This is true, where instead of just housing people and shackling them as they did in the public institutions, these were meant to resemble country houses or five-star hotels. And the theory was that if someone's mind was unbalanced, if you put them in an environment, very pleasant environment, where they could pursue their hobbies and there was beauty everywhere, they would have caged songbirds in the hallways, you could bring your pets, you could wander into the village, that would help you retain your sanity. And so that is really interesting. And then the part that really kind of intrigued me was this abandoned house where these young teenagers explored. And I actually heard the story on This American Life on NPR 2002. And it was a house in New Hampshire where several young boys explored it. And the house was filled with all of this stuff, like the family had just picked up and left one day. And it was the whole summer that they spent trying to figure out what happened. And that just like a time capsule. And so
Yeah.
that just really captured my imagination. So I have the 15th century, I have Victoriana, and then I have this house from the early 1960s that was left exactly as it was. Something terrible happened there, but what? And why has the house been just shut up and abandoned all this time? So I guess you can tell that I love history.
Yeah, that brings up a lot of questions that you got to know. Tracy, is there history in yours?
There is, I would say there's more history in the first book in Ruby Red Herring, as far as the history of the specific artifacts and antiques that Avery is working with. In the manor house, the manor house, or modern day castle itself, is a huge piece of history. So that almost becomes its own character. And we do learn, you know, by the end of the book, like we learn why there are passageways and why there are, you know, secret panels in the walls. And but yeah, now, you know, I read your book, Cordy. I'm in the middle of Trisha's, and I definitely have to read Connie's now.
You really do.
Yeah.
You really do. It's great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, history is a big part of the plot of Dead Men Don't Decorate, because there is the letter that her friend finds and that is missing when they find Roberto dead on the floor is supposedly from Sally Fairfax to George Washington, and dated in 1756. Now, I have a couple of questions. So if you don't mind, I will take these so they don't get so far ahead of me, okay? Some friends of mine said, can you repeat the titles of each of your books? So Connie, would you repeat the title of your book?
Yeah, my latest one is called The Shadow of Memory.
And that's number 4 in the series.
That's number 4.
Yeah. So Trish?
Mine's The Art of the Decoy, and Scandal Mountain Antiques Mystery Series.
Yeah. And that's number 1 in the series,
That's
right?
number 1. I actually have, this is The Art of Deception, which is out in April. I just got uncorrected proof arcs here for
That's exciting.
which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, so Tracy, the number 1 is Ruby Red Herring in the series, and number 2 is?
Number 2 is Peril at Pennington Manor.
Yeah, and this is number 1 in the Old Town Antiques Mysteries. Dead Men Don't Decorate. Okay, and here's another one. It says anonymous attendee. It says, Lane, FYI, I ratted you out to Carolyn about being in your book, because Carolyn Pack is the librarian in the book. The setting is clearly Alexandria. Why did you change the name? And then she's speaking of names, why Cordy Abbott? Well, the real Cordy is walking around here on 4 legs someplace, so I just kind of like it. And the editor wanted me to not call it Alexandria, just so I wouldn't make anyone mad, you know, by making the town like, you know, murder capital of the area by having a dead body once a year, you know. So that's the answer to that. And then Heather Harrison, this is very sweet. She says, these all sound so good. So thank you very much, Heather. Okay, so we can go back. Now let's talk about characters for a while. And this, I'll just open up for anybody. How much of yourself is reflected in your protagonist? Just anybody jump in.
I can jump in and just say that, honestly, I think that there's a part of ourselves in every single one of our characters, because everything that we write has to come out of our brain.
Yeah.
Either something we've experienced or have heard about or have observed, or have read. So all of this is coming out of our brain. But with my protagonist, she is a 46-year-old widow, And I went to a book club one time, and somebody afterwards said to me, how long has it been since you lost your husband? And I said, no, I am, my husband is alive. That's my character. So I think that sometimes the readers get us mixed up with our characters as well. So there is a lot of me in Kate. She is younger, taller, slimmer, smarter.
But you look like a Kate. You could totally be a Kate.
Do I? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Trish, is there any of you and your protagonist?
Well, I think she's a much better version. My main character is in her late 20s, which I am not. And she probably does things, she's the better side of a person I wish I could be. She's braver, she's smarter, she's willing to go probably further than I would. And I like to think she's a little more broken than I am emotionally inside. She has more trauma to recover from. The thing that I think is interesting is that as we write books, some of us, and I know it's the case with me, the voice of the book sounds like my voice. So the narrator probably is more like me, and my books are first person, so that part of it, and a lot of people say, oh, I can hear you telling me the story. So that, which is a little different aspect of it.
Tracy?
Yeah.
How about
Trish just described exactly what was in my head, what I would say about my main character is mid to late 20s, which I am in my head. And she's a lot like me, but she's definitely braver and nervier for sure. She takes risks that I wouldn't be brave enough to, which it's just so much fun to write, because you're living through your character sometimes. But I think I've never tried to write a character that is not at all like me. I've never tried to write a main character that is completely opposite of me. I don't know if I could. So
interesting. Yeah. Well, and my main character, she's like a decade younger than me, but she's also is kind of an aspirational thing also, like she dresses really well, and she has an electric car, and my husband thinks that's just way too far into the future for us, but she's someone that I would like to be friends with, Now, amateur sleuths, which we all have, can't conduct actual interrogations, searches, or they shouldn't, or make arrests, and they shouldn't do that either. That would be a big no-no, right, for the local police. How do you deal with the police aspect of your books? And we'll talk about this more when we talk about research, but does your amateur sleuth ever cross that line? Trish?
Oh, yeah, of course she does.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely crosses the line. In book 2, her boyfriend, who is in law enforcement, and her actually have to come to terms with this issue. And it was a hard part to write, because to me, the emotional aspect of the characters' lives, and in my case, the law enforcement connections, or one of them, is a personal one. So yes, they do butt heads. And Vermont's a very interesting place as far as law enforcement goes. We have a lot of towns in Vermont that have no police force whatsoever. I would say probably a majority of towns. We have our state police work out of a barracks, but the state police can freely go to other parts of the state, which is not true in many, many states. We have border people up here. So the trouble she can get into, I mean, we have game wardens, and I think I have, in the Art of the Decoy, have 4 or 5 different law enforcement agencies that are involved in it, because they would be in this area. So yes, it's very easy to get in trouble.
Yeah, and you can cause a lot of trouble like that. Yeah. So Connie, How, does your
Well,
main character ever
my-
go over the line?
Yeah, my character has a little bit, or I as a writer have a little extra problem because I'm dealing with policing in the UK.
Yeah.
And Kate and her lover, Tom, he is a detective inspector in the Suffolk Constabulary. They met when they in the Scottish Hebrides when they teamed up to solve a murder where they were both outsiders. And he of course can't tell her everything, but he has learned to respect certain gifts that she has. She can see patterns, she can see connections. And she actually, in some cases, has a freedom that he does not have because policemen can't deal with a crime before it happens. And they have to deal with evidence and facts. And Kate can deal with the what ifs. So she is mainly dealing with her skills and gifts as an antique dealer and appraiser, but there always is a connection with crime. And Tom is the one who can actually then arrest someone.
So Tracy and Trish, how does the age of your character affect how does it shape the plot, if it does at all? How does it affect how they investigate?
Having my character is, I believe she's 26 in Ruby. So yeah, I think she's 26. She is young. She is young to me, but she also has dealt with, she's dealing with the loss of both parents. She's finishing raising her teenage sister. She's taking over her parents' business. So she has had to finish growing up really, really fast.
Yeah.
And I think that in a way, it helps her be able to take on the role of exploring what she needs to in order to solve the mystery.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you, Trish?
Yeah, my character is in a similar situation age-wise, and I like that. It's that cusp of the late 30s where you finally really are, you're done with college, you're done, and you have to sort of move into the world. In my case, my main character had been caught for selling stolen property in her hometown, and she had gone back. She had her record expunged, and she had managed to go back and work. She worked for Christie's, and when she returns home, it's a small town, so even if your record's expunged, people know your mother's in jail, prison for forgery. They know what you've done. So she really has come to a point in her life where she's done with it. She wants to prove herself. And I think that's very common as people approach 30, is that they're adult, they're mature, and she's going to stand her ground, which she couldn't do earlier in her life.
Interesting.
And may I jump in and ask you a question, Cordy? Because I think your protagonist is the oldest.
She's 55.
She's like 55.
Yeah.
And so I'm just listening to this. I'm thinking about my own character. What advantages would she have as an older woman? What could she bring to her investigation that maybe a younger person would not?
She she's kind of invisible to some people, and so that allows her to go in and find out things, and people will tell her things that they might not tell the police or something like that. So, and also she's been there, done that, and she really doesn't care what people think, and so she's gonna kind of go in when other people might not go in. So, and when she has a very strong moral compass too, that I think is part of her age too. I mean, not that you can't when you're young, you certainly can't, but it just becomes more clear to you, so. There.
So I've got one more question for you.
Okay.
Because I'm just so interested, because I just started reading it. Her son is now the mayor of the town. So she has an adult son that she deals with. How does that work out?
Well, she's so much fun, and her best friend Opal is so much fun, and they love 70s rock music, and they're very funny, and they do crazy things. But the son is kind of he's so straight, and kind of he's just really straight, really like a stick in the mud, and she just wants him to meet someone so that he will leave her alone and won't always be worrying about her, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And here's some more questions for Tracy. Speaking of age, I read and listened to the audiobook of Ruby Red Herring, and I felt the voice artist sounded a little too young to be Avery. Did the same voice artist do Peril? It's still in my to be read pile. That's
Yes. Yep. Hi, Valerie. I think the voice artist is Priya Iyer, and I have not had this happen before, but my daughter and I and my agent got to have input on who would be able to be the voice actress to read. So she does sound young. I absolutely would agree with that. She probably sounded the youngest out of all the ones that we listened to, but we fell in love with her voice. So she does read Peril. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie, for that question. Yeah, they sent me like 4 or 5 auditions to listen to, and kind of you were asking about the age. Well, a couple of these people, they made her sound like she was 100 years old. And that's not how I see her. I see her as very active and involved and, engaged. And so I was very happy when I got my first choice. Thank you very much for the question, Valerie.
I'll tell you a very funny story about this. When I have They Are the Decoy also has an audiobook, and I got 3 recordings to listen to, and I'd never had an audiobook before. And I was a little nervous, as writers sometimes do. And I'm listening to this and I'm going, every single one of these voice artists is from Australia and has an Australian accent. So I spent a long time going to their websites and finding one who said they could do a New England American accent. And when I wrote back, I said, well, this is the only choice. The other ones really do great job with British and Australian. And then I got an email right back and said, oh my gosh, we sent you the wrong recordings.
Oh, that's so funny.
I spent hours. I was just, oh my God, this is going to be horrible.
Connie, you want to say anything about your ebooks?
Yeah, well,
I mean, audiobooks. I said ebooks, I meant audio.
My audiobooks. The only thing I have to say is that the woman who does mine is Scottish, and my first book was set in Scotland. She also does a really, really wonderful British accents, and I think she does an okay accent for Kate, and a Midwestern American accent, but I have listened to a lot of books where it is American narrators trying to do British, and it's really pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
And so I told my publisher that I would rather have a British person, because all the characters except Kate are British, rather have that and have them do a pretty good American rather than have an American and do really horrible. I mean, Scottish accent, even though I grew up with it, I can't do it. It is really, really hard. And she nails it, obviously, because she's Scottish.
Yeah. My grandmother lived with us for a short while, and she's Scottish. I could not understand her. I mean, we were kids. We could not understand her because her brogue was so thick. So we are really getting low on time, but I want to talk just for a minute about research. So how much police procedure do you include in your series, and how can you make sure that you're getting it right? Tracy, you want to take that?
Yeah, I actually I have used, and I credited him in in Ruby Red Herring, I used a friend of my late father to help me with this. He worked in forensics in Detroit, and he was just a really valuable resource anytime I had questions about anything, really, because he started as a street cop and worked his way up. And then I also discovered on Spotify a podcast called The Daily Docket. And oh my gosh, for any crime writer, any type of crime writer, that is amazing. And I would have that on in the background sometimes just as I'm writing, because it's great for those little details, those little nuggets that you really want to get right.
Yeah, yeah. So how about you, Trish? Who do you go to for your research?
I actually wanted to recommend a book if people are interested in art and antique crime. This is nonfiction.
Oh yeah, that was good. Yeah.
And it's just a great book. And that actually, when I started reading it, I was familiar with a lot of the crimes just from being in the antique industry. So it was really cool. I know people in probation and parole. I've spoken with them. There's also a Facebook group called Cops and Writers. And Cops and Writers have law enforcement people from all over the world, and you can go in there and ask them questions. And they have a podcast as well. And that's been a big help. I basically ask people. I mean, you know, I'm not beyond like walking up to a police officer and asking them questions.
And actually, it's kind of a coincidence because a couple of years ago, that book was the All Alexandria Reads book.
Yeah, it's just a fabulous, and it's entertaining. And you can look around, you can find podcasts and interviews with him too.
So Connie, how about you? How do you research the police part of the?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to find sources in the UK, because, as I said, things are different. So I have, so my detective inspector is in the Suffolk Constabulary, and I actually have a detective inspector. It's a woman named Tamlin Burgess in the Suffolk Constabulary, and I've spent time with her. She's shown me all over, answered my questions. I have a guy, or actually a woman, in the Suffolk Coroner's office. I have a lawyer. I have a guy at the National Trust, because that comes into my book. So it's really interesting. I think most people really would like to help you and are more than happy if you ask them, and ask them politely. More than often they will say, yeah. Yeah,
they want us to get it right and not wrong. And in the book, there's a character that I call Frenchie, and it's actually John French, who is a local writer. He lives in Baltimore, and he's I know him because he's in the Mystery Writers of America chapter that I'm in, and he is a retired crime scene supervisor in Baltimore. So he's been a big help. And then a guy named Mark Bergen, a retired Alexandria police officer, is in my critique group, and they're just wonderful. So it is like 5 till, and I just want to give people another chance to ask questions. I don't see any news, but drop them in there if you have them. And so, but I want to be sure that we have time to talk about what we're writing now. Connie, you want to talk about tell us what you're doing now?
I just finished working on a round robin short story for a blogging group that I am with, Writers Who Kill. And I was able to do the first chapter and the epilogue. That was very fun. I also just turned in an ebook novella that is going to come out in 2023. And I am working on book 5 in the Kate Hamilton series that'll come out in 2024.
Yeah, I'm excited about the novella because I know a little bit about it. So I think that'll be great. Tracy, what are you working on now?
I am working on the 3rd book in the Avery Ayers series. I'm not sure that will happen yet, but I love the story and the characters, so I'm working on that. And I just turned in final edits for my first women's fiction novel under a pen name, Jess Sinclair. That comes out next year and is called Secrets We Kept.
What's that about? Can you tell us? How much can you?
I
Huh?
can briefly tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about a woman who returns home to her small Florida Gulf Coast fishing community to find out what happened with her mother's unexplained drowning death and reconnect with her childhood sweetheart and kind of delve into the messy fallout that her family had with the sort of the conglomerate fishing family that runs the town.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
Awesome.
Trish.
So I just finished with my book that comes out in April, A Wealth of Deception, and that centers on a outsider art. So it's really a very interesting, it's been really fun to write about.
Yeah.
And I'm
You
now
mean public
working.
art like Banksy? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Like outsider
yes.
art? Yeah.
Yeah, it's about outsider art. She goes to a house to help ladies put together a yard sale, and the woman's grandmother is deceased, and she's selling off her items, and it's all these Russian collectibles, but amongst all these little tea sets and coffee things, it is this very dark and frightening collage, and she recognizes it from working at Christie's as work of a woman by the name of Vespa, who is the 21st century version of Grandma Moses. But when she asked the woman, you know, how this picture ended up there, the woman says, oh, she's very, very embarrassed. And she says, that was made by my brother. He does it for art therapy. He was intellectually disabled after a traumatic brain injury. And my main character knows it wasn't by someone else. She knows, she's personally seen these outsider art done by this famous Vespa. So that's
Sounds interesting.
yeah. So that's, she sets out to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a real person, Trish? Is Vespa a real person?
Of course not. I'm a writer.
Okay. Okay. All right.
And I'm actually working on a new novel that centers on bottle diggers, which is like mudlarking in London, people who dig in old outhouses and cellar holes, and a very, very, very valuable bottle. So we're going in a different line of things here.
I think we are. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm working on book 2 in the art thriller series, and book 1 was The Collector that came out in May, and book 2 is The Canvas, and that will come out in May of next year. So this has been so much fun. I just appreciate everybody coming so much. It was, we wish we could see the audience, but we can't. But we thank you so much for coming. It's been a lot of fun. We really appreciate it. Anybody else have anything to say before we say goodnight?
I just want to say an extra thank you to you, Lane, for you've done a wonderful job keeping
Yes,
things.
thank you.
Oh, it's fun. It was fun.
And thank you for everyone for coming out. It's really wonderful, all the support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Connie,
thank
were you gonna
you so much.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, I'll turn off now. Thank you.
Oh, there's a question in down there, or
Well, no, that's the leftover one.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're about to hear my cuckoo clock. It's 8 o'clock, and so it will probably go off 3 times or 12 times or what. It will go off any number of times other than 8. I'll tell you that. So
it's a real cuckoo clock.
And may I just say that each of us have websites, and
Yeah.
you can just look under our names,
Yeah.
Connie Berry, Tracy Gardner, Trish Esden, and
And
yours is
Cordy-
under what?
Cordy Abbott. Cordy Abbott.
Cordy Abbott.
Mhm.
And I think we all have newsletters. So if you'd like to keep up with us and find out what we're doing and where we'll be and what's coming next, go on there and you can sign up. That'd be great.
Yeah, we'd love to stay in touch. Okay. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.